The Bicoles/van wall machines have certainly had an impact in their time in WEC, but they have become one of an ever-decreasing number of bespoke prototypes competing in the World Endurance Championship. Since the introduction of the Hypercar class, the amount of manufacturer interest in sports car racing has grown exponentially. A large number of you would even argue that the top class of endurance racing has never been this good, and we may not have even reached its peak yet. However, at the beginning, it was just Toyota, along with the grandfathered LMP1 Alpine and the Glickenhaus. The bespoke brand carried on until the end of 2023, when they decided to pull out of the series. I'll probably go into more detail on their effort in a separate video. However, I've already done a video on the Bicoles/van wall effort. That went on until the end of 2023 also, albeit they made their debut in 2023 after an extensive testing program. The team though were intending to carry on beyond 2023, but were not granted an entry into the 2024 campaign. Even more manufacturers were entering the Hypercar class in 2024, and with a cap on the amount of entries being included, the Bicoles/van wall effort didn't compete. But that didn't mean that the bespoke brands were consigned to the pages of history. This is an Isotta Fraschini Tipo 6 LMH-Competizione. And yes, you'd be forgiven for not knowing who this brand were. Albeit, an Isotta Fraschini does sound like the sort of car that James Bond's Italian cousin would drive. The brand began life in 1900 and started making their own automobiles, and fairly fancy ones at that. But the 1930s economic crisis and World War II brought an end to them producing automobiles in 1949. They have existed since then, but not through car making, until in 2022 the brand were revived once again, which is where the world of sports car racing piqued their interest. A car was being constructed, and eventually morphed from the discussion phase to the point of being a physical reality. And on paper, there were a lot of really interesting and promising details. The building and designing of the car by longtime Ferrari race car constructor Michelotto, a company that began its Ferrari association with 308 GTBs designed for rallying. Another thing that would be done by Michelotto would be a joint development with the engine alongside HWA, a company that's been long associated with DTM and for a brief time participated in Formula E. The power unit in question would be a 3-litre V6. It was a bespoke unit, not one that had had its origins in some other machinery beforehand. Meanwhile, Williams Advanced Engineering would help in aero design. However, there's one aspect in particular that would make the Isotta much different to the other bespoke hypercar manufacturers competing in the WEC, and that would be the addition of a hybrid system. Now, this is not too dissimilar to the spec hybrid system that's utilised in all the prototypes that race under the LMDH regulations, but it isn't the same system. The hybrid system's power would be sent to the front wheels, but the car itself was four-wheel drive, and would have at least 670 horsepower, which is in the ballpark for all of the other hypercars. There was also another addition that regular viewers of my channel may have heard about before. The managing director was Claudio Berro, which you may recall from the Lotus Evora GTE video, and he was also with Maserati in relation to the absolutely wonderful MC12 GT1 machine. Claudio said in relation to the Isotta Fraschini project, "The partners, technical and financial, are all very serious about the vision, passionate about the project, and driving together to get there. I hope we get the opportunity to join what looks like an amazing entry." With the main technical details gone over, it was time to find a team that would run the operation, similar to how Penske runs the factory Porsches and WRT the BMWs. And the team to run the car that would be later known as the Tipo 6 LMH-Competizione would be the very recently created Vector Sport outfit. The team only began racing in 2022 in that year's WEC campaign in the LMP2 class, but despite their lack of years as an organisation, they'd shown to be a pretty competent operation. Here is what Vector Sport's team principal Gary Holland had to say. Vector Sport came into endurance racing with long-term plans and ambitions, and we are delighted to have reached this agreement with Isotta Fraschini after a thorough evaluation process, as it matches exactly our goals. Now, WEC did reject the team's application to compete in the full 2023 season, and without wishing to go into a tangent, the car never ended up competing in 2023 at all. Although, to be honest, given how the team had just gotten its first racing chassis delivered in and around the dawn of the year of 2023, perhaps a full year being able to test the machine outside of the spotlight of competition, in what was clearly still a very early stage of the program, it may not have been that bad of a thing for the car to have not competed just yet. In February of that year, the car was revealed, and it looked pretty good, but it certainly had a fairly distinctive and standoutish airbox. Also, as a rather irrelevant side point, if you look at it directly nose on, it kind of looks like the Ligier LMP2 car. Anyhow, during the course of the year the car would be tested, and it seemed like things were going quite smoothly in that regard. The car would then make its debut in a public setting at the WEC round in Monza. Not through competing, but through demonstration/exhibition laps, if you will. Then, some positive news came in the form of the Isotta Fraschini being included in the Hypercar entry for the 2024 WEC season. Bellissimo! However, there'd be no Vector Sport with the programme. This is what Vector Sport said in a statement. As widely publicised, Vector Sport was chosen to be the factory team for the new Isotta Fraschini LMH car in 2024, a collaboration dating back to December 2022 when the contract was signed and announced. Since the spring of 2023, Vector Sport has been expecting to manage the testing and race development programme, as originally agreed, in preparation for the competition next year. In reality, Isotta Fraschini has failed to release the WEC or any data, despite repeated requests. With that though, the Isotta Fraschini would have a new team running it. Another LMP2 outfit, but also LMP3 constructor, Dakeen. Claudio Berro said, "After a year of intense work, assisted by Isotta Engineering, the project achieved its goal. Now we will have to compete with the most important car manufacturers in the world, a commitment that will motivate us and our sporting partner, Dakeen, even more." Now in terms of drivers, there were a few rumours going around in the early stages of this programme that a successful and well-known driver was potentially going to be one of its factory drivers. Who that driver was, and whether or not it was one of the three drivers that ended up in the seat, I don't know. The driver that would perhaps fit the description best out of the three was successful touring car star Jean-Carl Vernet. Meanwhile, Mexican F3 racer Alex Garcia was initially signed to drive for them too. An interesting choice, but despite his rather unspectacular F3 campaign, that same year he won the LMP3 class of the European Le Mans Series, so there was certainly some potential. However, he would end up not racing for them ultimately. Instead, they would have former Indy Lights driver in Canadian Antonio Serravalle and Thai-American single-seater racer Carl Watana Bennett. Both drivers weren't bad at all, but they for sure had a lack of experience in this kind of racing. Now, as usual, here are some quotes, starting with Jean-Carl Vernet. "Being involved in the project since the beginning, it's super exciting for me. I think it's fantastic news taking part in the FIA WEC 2024 season. It won't be easy because the people we are battling against are super strong and with a lot of experience that we don't have, but I'm looking forward to it. And let's keep pushing." Antonio said, "I feel incredibly honoured to compete for Isotta Fraschini and Isotta Engineering, both with their rich history." Carl said, "Joining forces with Isotta Fraschini and Dakeen team is a realisation of a lifelong dream. I'm committed to giving my absolute best. Together with Isotta Dakeen, I'm confident that we will achieve great things together." And finally, Claudio Berro said, "I am very curious to see how this mix of youth and experience will work in a really competitive championship like the FIA WEC." So with that, let's get to see how their racing season began at the Losail circuit in Qatar. Of course, let's be honest, to expect to see this effort fighting with the established manufacturers of the world was not realistic. It's effectively a learning year for them. They even opted to go with the young drivers as a way of taking the pressure off themselves. So we shouldn't have expected anything particularly special. Albeit, at least personally speaking, I feel like even if the driver lineup contained 3 solid seasoned sports car pilots, the pressure wouldn't be any greater. Expecting this team and car to be with the pack immediately would have been pretty unrealistic. However, they were fast in a straight line from the early running, which I guess is always a positive, right? Vernet would have a moment in free practice too, but in qualifying, the car would set a lap time just over 4 seconds slower than the fastest Hypercar lap time set over both the qualifying and Hyperpole sessions combined. The race, meanwhile, wasn't great. The car stopped for whatever reason on the formation lap, but would continue. However, greater problems would come later. After a penalty hampered the car's progress, which was due to a technical infringement, suspension problems brought the car to a retirement. The issue may have been repairable, but it was decided not to risk any further gremlins and take a look back in Europe. The next round was at the team's home race in Imola, and there was a bit of an improvement in qualifying, now within 3.5 seconds of the fastest time in the qualifying session. The race was also an improvement in the regard that they finished. If only that was all that happened though. In the braking zone to turn 1, a stack-up style accident meant that the car would pick up a little bit of front-end damage. Not enough to pit, but you could certainly see that its aerodynamics had been somewhat impacted. Then on cold tyres, the car would crash on the exit of Acqua Minerale, and would then have another incident at Variante Alta, with rain also potentially playing a role. Once recovered from the gravel, the car would carry on, and they'd finish in 17th place, 14 laps down. At Spa-Francorchamps, the car was again within 3.5 seconds of the fastest time in the qualifying session it ran in. However, in the race, a real sign of positivity and steps in the right direction. Just 3 laps down this time to the winner, and were a bit closer to the field on pace. Claudio Berro had this to say about these encouraging signs. In the final part of the race, when the battle for the top places was at its maximum expression, Jean-Carl Vernet demonstrated that the car's race pace wasn't far from the top, especially in the second sector of the Spa-Francorchamps circuit. There are still developments to make to have the ambition of competing with the best group, but we hope this will happen in the most important race of the year, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Of course, the crown jewel of the WEC season, the one everyone wants to win, one of the biggest motor races in the world. However, for this team, once again, just getting to the finish with either 0 or minimal problems would be great. In qualifying, it was around 5 seconds slower than the fastest time in that session. In the race itself though, well, there's very little to say about it. Which frankly, is a very good thing, because it probably means that it had an unspectacular, trouble-free race. And it did, with the exception of a contact-influenced spin at the final chicane during the middle of the night. But that's exactly what it needed. 24 hours of data, experience, learning, and reliability. And it wasn't done in easy conditions either, with the weather making it very tricky to keep all 4 tyres on the tarmac. But it helped them to a 14th place finish. They would need to find more performance obviously if they wanted to be contenders in the future, as being 9 laps down on the winner is not great, but it's a starting point. Claudio said this: "What can I say? A plan that was respected that led to the culmination of the work of these years. After 3 races of development and preparation, this was the result we wanted. A flawless race, concentrating only on tyres and fuel and 0 problems." Up next on the WEC adventure would be the brilliant Interlagos circuit in Brazil. However, before the weekend began, Claudio Berro was no longer in the managing director's role of the programme. He would effectively be replaced by Miguel Valdecabrez. I've probably got the pronunciation of that name horribly wrong, so sorry about that. Who was recently appointed as the CEO of Isotta Fraschini. In a statement, the company said, "The entire management of Isotta Fraschini Milano Fabbrica Automobili intends to thank Claudio Berro for his commitment, which culminated with a participation in the French 24-hour race, where the final result rewarded the quality of the vehicle and the entire organisation, which worked hard for 2 years to achieve this precious goal." President Alessandro Fassina confirms that Claudio Berro will remain close to Isotta Fraschini, not forgetting the commitment, passion and results obtained in defining the World Endurance Championship project. There was something else that the company needed to consider, and that was that if they wanted to compete in the Hypercar class of WEC next year, they needed to field 2 cars. But for now, let's just focus on the Interlagos event first. In qualifying, they were still the slowest car in the class, but this time they were within 2 seconds of the fastest time set during the qualifying sessions, and were not far at all from the main pack. In the race, again, a really encouraging improvement in terms of performance. However, this time, it would suffer with a reliability problem. After collecting a penalty earlier in the race, unfortunately an electrical gremlin would result in the car retiring, after completing 149 laps. A shame, but after some great showings in different aspects from the most recent races, maybe this positive trajectory would keep going for the next round at the Circuit of the Americas. However, as it turned out, that retirement at Interlagos is the last time the car would race as of this recording, And also, as of this recording, it's pretty unlikely that we'll see it race again in the WEC, as suddenly, Isotta Fraschini announced that they were withdrawing from the World Endurance Championship. In a statement, the brand said, Isotta Fraschini Milano Fabbrica Automobili has announced its immediate withdrawal from the 2024 World Endurance Championship season, as there are no longer any conditions to continue the partnership with the French team Dakeen. Following a productive debut season, highlighted by a successful finish at the iconic 24 Hours of Le Mans, the car brand has decided to redirect its resources toward restructuring its motorsports program and expanding its track and road car initiatives. And that is that. The project at the moment is at a bit of a standstill, and with not much prospect at it getting back onto the grid. The most recent update on the project that I can find is from late August of last year, where the company that constructed the Isotta Fraschini, Michelotto, said at the time that they were hopeful that they'd be back on the grid for 2025. Of course though, that has not happened, and it just leaves us with many what-ifs, as this effort hasn't shown what it could have done with more time. It's fair to say that the car had definitely started to make significant progress over the course of the year, in terms of performance. The reliability was never really a huge problem from the events that it did do. The driver lineup was on the more inexperienced side, particularly in endurance racing. And for an inexperienced team, having 3 seasoned endurance racing pilots behind the wheel would have made things a bit easier for them, I feel. I'm not saying Antonio and Carl are bad drivers, but more experienced drivers would have helped in my view. This project certainly had a lot of promise from who had gotten involved in the construction of the car. Michelotto, HWA and Williams Advanced Engineering, along with many others, are certainly the sort of firms you'd want involved in creating a new racing machine. For me, out of all the bespoke prototype cars that we've seen compete in recent years, I felt like this effort had the greatest chance of actually being a contender. Having a hybrid system, like nearly all of the other brands, was very important in this car having a chance to compete. Obviously the bespoke brands are unlikely to have the same resources as the manufacturer-backed efforts, but this entry had a lot going for it, and had the potential to be a contender in the future in my opinion. They were getting better as the season progressed as well, which makes its withdrawal all the more dispiriting. I'm not saying that we'd have seen Isotta Fraschini etch its name into the winners list of Le Mans, but it would have been great to see the underdog brand show what they could have done. All I will say is, if you hadn't heard of them prior to the WEC season, you more than likely do now. That, however, is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. What are your thoughts on this effort? And do you think that there was more potential to come from it? Say down in the comment section below. Also, if you did enjoy this video, then I'd be incredibly appreciative if you did hit the like and subscribe buttons. But until the next video, be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.